Yes, guys, how you doing? Welcome back to the Spurs Talk Show. I am Sean Butler. Bugsy Malone's up in front. I hope you're all happy and healthy doing the things that you love to do with those you love to do them with. Please, guys, do me a favour. Smash the granny out of the like button. Drum the thumb, people. Drum the thumb. Hit the notification bell and drop a comment. Let me know your thoughts on today's topics. Opinions, we have a few. Some of them will be, I guess, spicy to your ears or to your eyes because, you know, I've been saying about Christian Romero for a while, and I feel like well, you know how I feel if you haven't watched it, but you'll find out in a second. But we've got a little update to that story with regards Simone Inzaghi, another demonstration of the public converse of a story that should really be held behind the scenes, and that is another demonstration, I believe, of an agent and a player that is doing everything they can to try to manipulate a situation, to engineer a situation whereby the club that wants the player, pretty much the only club that's come out and said that they want the player, that they can't afford at the price point that is very viable, well, they'd like to kind of engineer a situation where they can get him on the cheap. And I think that that's another demonstration should be forthcoming here from Daniel Levy, where he says, nah, bro, this isn't my first rodeo. You're going to do it our way, or you're going to continue to play or be a part of Tottenham Hotspur. And I think we need to recognise here where the leverage sits, given the contract situation, and really, just call it as I see it. I know a lot of you disagree, but that's fine. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Garnacho as well. Talk about no dickheads policy, some Garnacho stories, and obviously the Cuti Romero thing. I think you could park him in that bucket at the moment. How about Sonny to Fenerbahce? We'll talk about that story. Brian Hill, new stories about him. Hayden Hackney, Marcus Rashford, and Patrick Schick. You know Patrick Schick of Leverkusen fame? Haven't spoken about this guy's name for a while, but he's up and about in the old transfer news, views and clues this morning. So I look forward to all of that, guys. As I say, please smash the like button, smash the subscribe, hit the notification bell, and drop the comments. Let me know your thoughts. Let's start with Simeone, right? So he was asked, I think it was yesterday, about Cuti Romero. Do you like the player? He said, do I like the player? Obviously. He's a very great player. And, or was it, do I want the player? I forget now whether the question was, do I like the player or do I want the player? I think he said, either way, he said, obviously, he's a great player. And to me, like I say, you shouldn't be talking about other players of other teams unless it's kind of just in kind of admiration. But for me right now, as I say, with Cuti Romero's display of the last couple of days, this might be a nothing burger, but it all adds to that spice that I think that there is an agent and an Atletico Madrid kind of relationship here where they're trying to find different mechanisms whereby the news can be spun, the stories can be spun into ways that kind of create an unsettled environment, and whereby Daniel Levy might end up saying, well, okay, got to get this guy out of the club, and we'll take a price point that is below market valuation relative to what you get as a comparable. Now, remember, guys, basically, if we lose him, we have to go and spend it whatever money we get for him, we have to go and replace him, probably with the largest part, in all likelihood, of that money. Now, someone like Jared Branthwaite, if he is 70 million quid, now, all fair's fair, Jared Branthwaite has a lot higher availability over the last couple of years than Romero does. Romero's a better ball-playing centre-back, but I think Branthwaite, his statistics at least, suggest that he is, you know, better at the kind of traditional mechanisms of what defenders are supposed to do. He's two-footed, he's homegrown, there is the English tax, or the British tax. And so all of those sort of things can be parked into the rationale here. But if you're going to spend 70 million on him, isn't Christian Romero a Europa League winner? Isn't he a World Cup winner? Hasn't he won 5 out of 6 finals that he's participated in? All of these things that are part of his own recipe in his mind, why he thinks that he's above Tottenham Hotspur, and where he can behave, as I see it, in petulant formats to be able to engineer moves and to call out the board twice, to call out the medical team, essentially, all through clever inferences, without directly saying, you know, our club is poor, our club is terrible, our club's behaviour is wrong, versus my particular levels of demands, my particular expectations. He says other things are better, or whatever, like in the case of the Argentinian medical team. And for me, or the obstacles usage the other day, for me, I don't like it. It's unbecoming of professionalism. You don't bite the hand that feeds you. You don't go after your employer. And if you want to have those things, either have the stones to say it directly as you see it, and then we all know there's no room for kind of interpretation, or you say it behind the scenes. Now, he maybe does say it behind the scenes, but if you are saying it behind the scenes, there's no need to say it in public as well. To me, I thought that the timing of the obvious obstacles on the day that Thomas Frank came into the club is horrendous. As I say, if he does stay at the club because Daniel Levy says, no, our number is 70 million and Atletico Madrid are the only team that have expressed an interest, but they don't have 70 million because they've already spent their money on people like Johnny Cardoso and on Clement Longley, yada, 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 then why should we have to be a victim of the fact that this guy thinks that he's bigger and better than he is? If you're that good, Cootie, if you're that reliable, if you're such a monster, where are the other monster teams that are queuing up to bite to bite our hand off to get him through the door? There aren't any. Manchester United need a new centre-back. Liverpool need a new centre-back. Newcastle need a new centre-back. Has there been any expressions of interest from any of those clubs? No, not that I've seen. And so if there's no Premier League money at the table here, he's not going to go to Saudi, clearly. He wants to go to La Liga. Real Madrid don't want him. Barcelona don't want him. You know, I think sometimes you need to recognise the options that are in front of you, and if you only have a few or one, and even that one is thin at best in value because they don't have the money, then maybe you should be a little bit more, I don't know, sensitive and wise with when you shoot your shot, when you fire your weapon at the people that currently pay your wages, because you could end up with a situation where parts of the fan base might end up resenting you and you're still stuck here because the club has 2 years left on your contract. And so right now, the leverage is in our hands. The leverage is in the club's hands, not the player's hands, as much as he might think otherwise. It will be a fascinating story to develop, guys, but either way, Simeone Inzaghi has added more fuel to the fire by saying, obviously, he's an admirer, he's a great player, etc. So, the theme of today, well, we know Thomas Frank has got a no dickheads policy, right? Well, maybe Cuti Romero's becoming one. How about another one? Garnacho. Stories everywhere this morning that the 20-year-old winger is essentially on Tottenham's radar. Now, look, here's what I would say about Garnacho. Just for what it's worth, I mentioned this on a live stream yesterday. He is a player who comes with baggage for sure, right? He's obviously a bit arrogant. He's obviously fallen out with his manager, Amorim. You know, he had a problem with how he was being used next year, or last season rather, and apparently Amorim has said, go and find yourself another club. We shall see what happens there, but in terms of the player, he's a real talent. He's raw, for sure. There's areas of improvement, similar to Matisse Tell, but I think if you're looking at the pecking order of the two 20-year-olds, I think Garnacho is ahead of Matisse Tell in his own playing-wise development. I was using the Y-Scout tool looking for what I believe the club would be looking for as a prototypical interesting winger, and I was dialing up the various filters, and I must have gone through 20 or 30 different iterations with hundreds of filters of specific, XA, XG, takeover specialists, successful completions, crosses to the final third, long ball, whatever. Think of all the different variables you could think of that I believe would be logical for us to be looking for a new winger, and I was dialing them all up in various different instances, and I went from 800,000 players down to about 5 in those 20 iterations, and in every one of them, every one that I tried, making it more and more difficult to get the very highest level of output for the things that we need, Garnacho's name was always in that list, always. So look, that's my interpretation of what we would look for in a winger, and I would just sit there and say, if you put the baggage to one side, not that you should, but if you just park it for a second as a player, as a profile, as youth-centric as we seem to like, the potential to sell him on in the future if he gets his shit together, and the fact that he seems to be, in terms of the percentage game, at the very top end in European football with output that is something that we would look for, then to me, I don't hate it. I don't hate it. I know, I told you this is going to be a spicy conversation today. I'm probably going to have invoked a lot of you that love Cuti Romero. Now I'm probably going to invoke a lot of anguish and hatred from you lot for people that are massive anti-dickhead things with the Garnacho story. Here's what I would say, right? I'm with you. If he comes with the baggage and he thinks he's cocky and arrogant and all that stuff, then I don't want to walk into that sort of shit heap of problems either. However, if there is truth to the story that Tottenham are looking at him, if there is truth to the story that Thomas Frank will veto or approve any deal, and that he's happy to look for certain and speak to certain players like Manor Solomon, for example. Can we get on board the idea, potentially, similar to someone like Jack Grealish? I was having this chat last night with the guys on Football Heritage TV, that Jack Grealish, who's another player that we're linked with, £50 million is the asking price. Forget about the kind of the economics of the deal for a second. The viability of the deal for Jack Grealish, to me, depends on whether or not you have Jack Grealish on his A game, or whether you have a version of Jack Grealish that has somewhat put his feet up a little bit since he won the Champions League, and that has kind of ticked the boxes and maybe has, not saying down tools, but just, you know, lost a little bit of that motivation, that spice for life. Now, I'm not saying that there's any reason to suspect that he has, but the fact is he hasn't played for Manchester City when Manchester City pivoted to a slightly new strategy, but obviously had their worst year for a long time last year. And consequently, I just wonder whether or not there is, you know, a conversation here around someone like Jack Grealish or someone like Garnacho, whereby you know the players are good enough, both of them are more than good enough, different sort of players, but both of them are more than capable when they bring their A game, they're fully focused, committed and happy. If there's a different version of them, the version of them that some suggest exists with Jack Grealish, that's not about bad apple stuff, but just, you know, just sort of he's completed the computer game, if you like. And so is it as much fun to carry on playing once you've beaten the final boss? Why was it that Pep Guardiola didn't play him last season despite Manchester City's struggles? Is it because he's just moving into a new system, or is it because, you know, he wasn't doing what he used to do for Manchester City? Don't know. But if we trust in Thomas Frank, or we back the manager like we did with Ange and everyone before, Conte, Mourinho, and if the notion is true that the manager doesn't get given the players, that the manager picks the players or chooses the players, or at the very least approves the players. And Ange used to say he wouldn't want players that weren't entirely here. The first question that he would ask the players is, why do you want to come to Tottenham? I'd hope Thomas Frank would ask the same of Garnacho and of Jack Grealish and of another name that we're going to come to in a second. And if the answers are believable, genuine, sincere, authentic and attractive, then I'm okay with either of those solutions, because the best version of those players are better than what we have, for sure. The only other consideration from a Garnacho perspective is that under Thomas Frank, as I perceive it, interpret it, and let me know if you agree or disagree, his version of a two up the top, for example, certainly doesn't have wide men that hug the touchline. Even his three at the top, they're more inside forwards. They're certainly a lot narrower, which would suit someone like a Jack Grealish. I think it will suit Matthias Tell. With Garnacho, I think he's more of a take-on specialist type that likes to hug the touchline, or that on the counter that likes to break and take people on for days. I still think Garnacho is so raw and potentially coachable, but therein lies the kind of difficulty. If the stories are to be believed, that Tottenham are looking at Jack Grealish, looking at Garnacho, then, and Matthias Tell is already done, then I think if we're going to be okay with any of them, we have to believe that these guys can be developed, can be reignited, can get that baggage left behind and get the best version out of them. And I hope that Thomas Frank is the kind of coach and the man-to-man mentor that you have heard about in the press, because if he can get the best out of them, then I think we could get on board it. At least I could get on board it. Let me know your thoughts. The next name, guys, on that list, for what it's worth, just to continue the forward story, is there's rumours out today that we're very much looking at Marcus Rashford as well. Again, I don't know if this is from caught offside. I don't know how sincere it is. I don't know if it's just people just putting two and two together. Let's just throw any potential name out there as a potential left winger or an inside forward. But if we are looking for someone that can play more of the inside forward role, then for sure Marcus Rashford is another perfect example. And look, the version of him that we saw at Aston Villa was completely 180 from the version of him that we saw during the end of his time at Manchester United. So Unai Emery did manage to get the squeeze out of it, or the juice out of the squeeze. And so can Thomas Frank do the same? If that's the case, 100%. Obviously, all of these things I'm talking about here are viability from the player and the mentality. we have to also factor in the wages, the cost and all those things. And I'm sure Marcus Rashford, isn't going to want to leave Manchester United on a permanent deal unless he's getting paid something similar to what he currently is. Although maybe he'll recognise that right now that kind of salary is a bit of a cock block on his own potential progression, because unless he was to move for a permanent on a lower fee, then the next 5 years of his career, even if it wasn't at Tottenham or at Aston Villa, those things become easier to see, more pathways to future new homes if your wages are not completely in the top 0.01% of footballers in the world. So it'll be interesting to see. But let me know about Rashford. He's only 27. That's the caught offside story. Garnacho, 20 years old, and the same for Jack Grealish, who's obviously 29. Outgoing stories, guys. Bryan Gil is of interest to still of interest to Girona. There's that deal that we're waiting to see whether it gets entirely formalised or otherwise, but he's still injured. So Girona, as always, are trying to wiggle themselves out of a option/obligation at the certain asking point because of the injury. From what I sort of read, though, he met all of the sort of criteria that to be considered a permanent Girona player. If not through an obligation, then just through his performances being solid enough that there was value in the deal for Girona, and they want to keep him. But Olympiacos are also sniffing around. Remember, Olympiacos have just sold their striker to Brighton. I forget the guy's name. Constantinou or something. I forget the guy's name. 35 million euros Olympiacos just got paid by Brighton, and so they have a bit of money to burn and are looking for some sort of forward player to come in to help with that sort of hole-filling exercise. And so it might be that Bryan Gil is an option that's considered there. We shall see. Kind of forgot that Bryan Gil was a Tottenham player, to be entirely honest. And I thought that we'd got the money from in the past, but he's still got time on his contract at Tottenham. So we shall see what happens. Hayden Hackney, £20 million bid imminent, according to many reports today, for the 22-year-old, who's a very cultured midfielder, a player that, listen, I do really like Hayden Hackney, but I think that what we're seeing with the Hayden Hackney stories, I think a lot of people are reflecting on the fact that we were interested in Hayden Hackney at the same time as Palace were interested in Adam Wharton, and that because they play a similar style and they're both very kind of similar in their approach to football, both coming from championship teams, both sort of moving up potentially into the Premier League, that I think a lot of people potentially are parking that name Hayden Hackney in the I want him because he reminds me of Adam Wharton box. But they're not the same player, they're not the same person. There's obviously different things that might be a part of whether they do end up becoming as good as they can be, right? So I think that we need to be careful not to conflate the Adam Wharton story and just assume that the same thing's going to be happening with Hayden Hackney. That said, I do think the guy's a very good player. But are Tottenham going to end up here? This is the problem, right? Are we going to end up here selling Sonny, selling Ben Davies? In so doing, our average age of our squad drops to about 23 years old, 22 years old. If you sell Bissouma, it definitely drops down to about 22. And then we're going to be replacing them with players like potentially a Garnacho, who's 20 years old, players like Hayden Hackney. It will be like a university freshers team in terms of average age. We definitely need some level of mature leadership in that team at some point, and at the moment I'm struggling to see where we're going to go to get it. Even if you sign Mbeumo or an Eze, where they're a little bit more experienced, none of those guys have got European football as experience either. So, and by the way, that's not a problem for me. You don't get the experience until you get the experience, but we are moving into a Champions League era again, hopefully for the long term and for the foreseeable. But we don't have anyone really in that team now who has too much experience in that regard, especially if Sonny goes off to Fenerbahce, which is the latest link. Fenerbahce are willing to offer 30 million euros for Heung Min's son, and Tottenham apparently want a little bit more than that, about 40 million euros, so about 38 million pound. If that can be done, Fenerbahce's Jose Mourinho would hook back up with Sonny again. They might also come in for a double swoop for Bissouma as well. So Mourinho hooks back up with Bissouma and Sonny. Probably the deal would be structured somewhere around 52, 54 million euros. That's according to the reports. And that'll be interesting. That then puts that money back into the pot, allows us to go again But in what direction are we going, guys? As I say, there is very little in the way of experience in most of these stories. Marcus Rashford for sure is one. Let me know your thoughts on Marcus Rashford. Are these sort of no dickhead policies going to be a cop block for any of these types of stories? Or do you have the faith that if Thomas Frank has the conversation with these players that we believe through only stories we've heard in the media, remember all we know is of what we see in the media, and the media can lie to you or obfuscate or twist the truth, and so we don't know what these players are really like, what they're really thinking, where their motivations really lie. But if Thomas Frank was to have a conversation and approves one or two of these names, would you be okay with it? Let me know. Next story for you guys is Yoann Wissa. The Guardian is talking about Tottenham. If they can't get Brentford's Mbeumo, they're going to go back in for Wissa. If in so doing, that would mean that there's a higher likelihood that Tottenham will be looking for a Richalison exit this summer, which I think most of us will probably be okay with. Although, as I've said 1,000 times, he don't want to go. He's like Leonardo de Richarlison in The Wolf of Wall Street. I ain't leaving. You're going to need a wrecking ball to take me out. But Yoann Wissa, nice player, right? Really good player. I think it was 27 years old, 20 goals a season. I find it odd to see, teams like Brentford and Bournemouth at the same time that are just being potentially completely ripped apart by outgoings. We've spoken about Bournemouth's potential sales. They've got 4 or 5 players, their best 4 or 5 players leaving their squad this summer. Be interesting if Tottenham do fail with Mbeumo. Is the reason why we're now apparently looking at players like Garnacho, looking at players like Rashford? Is it because the idea of getting Semenyo would just be too difficult? The price point that Bournemouth would ask, having just sold what they've already in ckheads, which is a done deal, was in all but name. Huijsen, there's 1 or 2 others as well that might be going, and now Justin Kluivert also on that list. I just wonder how motivated Bournemouth would be and what sort of asking price they would ask for those sorts of players. Last story for you today, guys, is Patrick Schick of Leverkusen fame. Now, there is a player that does come with experience, that is an absolute baller, and that he has been offered to several clubs around Europe. Apparently, it's time for him to move on from Leverkusen. Another team that is getting absolutely torn apart. It feels like there's maybe 5 or 6 teams around Europe, and a few in the Premier League for sure, that are either going through a mass sort of revolution of their own team, or in the initial instance at least, a mass clear out of their value. And it will be fascinating. Leverkusen, having lost Xabi Alonso, having lost Florian Wirtz, what's next? There's a couple other players there that might go as well. As I tell you what, there's one player that I'd love to see Tottenham be able to go and make an inquiry about, and that's Ezequiel Palacios, the DM-CM role. Absolutely brilliant. Flies under the radar. No one ever seemed to talk about him, but he is a top 5 percentile in everything you could want from a DM in the game. And I'd love to see if Tottenham could go and make an inquiry about that. If Leverkusen are in the market of just sort of shedding all of their value and all of their talent because they're going through their own sort of revamp. Let's find out. Guys, I think that's about it. Patrick Schick, though, let me know your thoughts on that. He's been around the block 1,000 times. He's a very, very talented guy. Scores goals galore. Again, another inside forward rather than a left winger. That seems to be the theme here, guys. And today's transfer news, the themes are too many dickheads, maybe. We don't want dickheads, no dickheads policy. But on top of that, it feels like a lot of the wingers that we're looking at are not so much traditional wingers. They seem to be more of that left side, inside forward that can cut in on the right-hand side and that can, I guess, be a perfect utilisation pivot into a front 2 should we go to a back 3 model at certain times next year, and allow our width to come from Pedro Porro, the best passer in our team, and Destiny Udogie, who for sure has so many more levels and gears to drop into that I can't wait to see him under a Thomas Frank development system. But in terms of the front line, more names, not necessarily the easiest names to get 100% behind because we're worried about sort of potential toxicity and poison apples. What about Cuti Romero? Maybe I'm being too harsh on him, but I definitely think that there is some kind of 4D chess being played here to engineer a move away at a price point that's more suitable to the buyer than it is to the seller, and I don't like that. The badge on the front is always more important than the name on the back. I respect Cuti Romero for what he's done for Tottenham, but at the same time, if you're only available for 50% of the minutes, can we do better? Possibly, probably, but in order to get the very best, we need to get the money. And money, as always, doesn't grow on trees. And so if we're going to let him go, I don't expect these sorts of tactics to be very helpful in their cause. It'd be much better to be handled in silence, but That's not the way it works. Let me know your thoughts, guys. Like, subscribe and comment. Remember, this stuff is all on Spotify, so if you are interested, get down to Spotify, links in the title, in the description rather, and I'll see you later on for a live stream. Like, subscribe and comment, and as always, bye-bye.